I guess we're ready to go. Take your seats and we'll get started. So thank you all for attending. This is the Evolving Impact Measurement over the next decade session. So we're going to really have a conversation. We're going to be provocative. We're going to challenge some of your assumptions around where we are in the space around impact measurement and where we're going, and talk about how we're going to get there. We've got 4 fantastic panelists, which you'll hear from shortly. But I want to set the stage for why we're having this session. My name is Karim Harji. I'm from Purpose Capital and an advisor to the Rockefeller Foundation. I'll be moderating this panel, and we're going to talk about the evolving landscape around impact measurement. You know, where are we? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? You'll hear 4 very different perspectives, and I'll encourage them to be provocative and challenge each other as well, because they're not going to have the same perspectives as you'll see shortly. So just for reference, this is part of a series of 5 conversations around impact measurement that are being hosted by the Rockefeller Foundation in partnership with Mission Hub and SOCAP. This is the first of a series of 5, and I'll talk about the others shortly. As you may know, the foundation has been involved in this area of impact investing for a long time as a field builder over the last 8 years. Over the last year in particular, as the field has grown in sophistication, you know, we have more capital, we have more products, this issue of impact has really come to the forefront. And the foundation has taken the last year to begin to convene thought leaders, experts, practitioners in a structured set of conversations around what is working in impact measurement, where are we going, what are some of the tools and frameworks that are being used in the industry today, and how can we have better evidence, how can we have better practice. And so this is part of that continuation of that conference, or that series. There are a couple of other events that we'll have similar panels on, and most notably next month at the American Evaluation Association and at Impact Convergence. Some of you I know will be there at both. And when we kick off this panel, as you'll hear about, this is really aspirational in terms of where are we going around impact measurement. We are going to talk a little bit about the challenges, but we're also going to talk about solutions. I think if we were having this panel 5 years ago, we would talk a lot about the challenges and also just talk about what we wish would have happened. Today you're going to hear about some very practical insights behind the aspirations. And I think also challenging some of our assumptions of why we haven't gotten maybe, you know, as far as we would have liked, you know, why some of our current solutions and strategies maybe are inadequate. For those of you that are following this track around impact measurement, the next panel right after this, actually in the firehouse, is going to talk about the frameworks that investors are using. The third panel, which is happening tomorrow morning, will talk about how social enterprises can operationalize their strategies around impact measurement. We'll hear a little bit about both of those perspectives today as well. The fourth panel, tomorrow afternoon, is going to talk about how the evaluation community can bring their learning and insights and tools to the impact investment sector. And finally, the fifth panel on Friday morning is going to talk about building the profession of social impact analysis. And as you can see, this is a progressive agenda starting from a high level and then thinking about what we're currently using and then how do we build the capacity, skills, and talent for the next decade. So just to give you a bit of structure around how all this works together. As I said, you'll hear from 4 speakers. All of them are situated at different parts of the ecosystem. And I'll make very brief introductions, but that will become evident from their remarks. 2 quick points to frame this panel. The first is that in the description we noted that this panel is about the potential for the field to deliver on impact. As I explained before, we've been talking about impact measurement for a long time. I mean, from the first SOCAP. And I remember some of the initial conversations are, you know, we think it's interesting, we know it's important, we'll figure it out later. And progressively, every SOCAP I think we've had, you know, a bit of incremental progress. I think today we're hoping to make a bit more of a leap. So we'll get into that. But we have to remember that impact investing is a means to an end. The capital side of things are really a means to be able to get to the ends, which are the outcomes: better prosperity, better social and economic conditions for families, for households, for communities. And I think today we'll hear a little bit about how approaches are being tested, validated, proven out in practice, but also, you know, what does that next generation of approaches look like? While this panel is aspirational, again, the heavy lifting these guys do in their day jobs is quite practical. So we'll oscillate between that. And I think just a second point to frame this is that the panel is not going to achieve consensus. That's not even the objective for today. It is going to be, I think, quite interesting to unpack the threads around where each of you sit, why you've made the choices around the approaches, frameworks, and tools that you do use, and what it means for this audience. And so we'll get into that because I think context matters when you talk about impact measurement, and today we're going to really unpack what that means from that perspective. So we may arrive at some common principles, we may arrive at some common approaches, but I don't think the goal from this panel is to achieve consensus. Sometimes we do this on panels where everybody, is happy with one answer. We're not going to get that, but I think we're going to get some really interesting insights around what it means for each of us. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing each one of them individually as they make their opening remarks. They're going to make opening remarks to answer two questions. Where is impact measurement headed over the next decade? What is it going to take to get there? So I'll start with Jim Fruchterman, who's the founder and CEO of Benetech. Many of you know Jim. He's been around talking about social enterprises in particular and their needs and issues around impact measurement. He recently authored an article in the SSIR, and stands for Social Innovation Review, that really challenged some of our assumptions around where we are and what's needed. And so he's going to expand on that and really, I think, elaborate on some of his insights around where we are and where we're going. So Jim, over to you.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Well, I love data. I'm a geek. That's what we do. But I think it's with a purpose. And I want to move us from a mindset around data that's around compliance to empowerment, where we don't think of data as this thing that we do for evaluation and monitoring, for being policed, for being in compliance with our grant agreements or our commitments to our investors. I want to see the use of data actually be integrated in with enterprises and delivering value to the people at the front end, as well as to the investors, the people with portfolios, and the policymakers. And so I talk to a lot of social entrepreneurs. I'm often one of the few engineers in the room with a lot of social entrepreneurs. And a lot of them see data and information systems as an overhead item. Some of their staff think of data collection as a distraction from why they're in the field. Instead of doing one more unit of service, helping one more person, they're busy doing that data questionnaire sort of thing. And so, modern businesses, we're based in Silicon Valley, modern businesses see information and data as a key strategic asset. The chief information officer is a core member of the senior management team rather than an afterthought or an adjunct to the chief financial officer or something like that. And so, people are actually using this information to do a better job, in many cases to make more money, but in our field, that we should be using information to ensure that we're delivering more impact. And so I think that kind of empowerment is really important. I often feel when I have conversations in the social sector that I'm dealing with years away from Silicon Valley, even if the conversation happens one day and the next day. So it's kind of like I'm in a time machine. I can see what people are doing in many social sector settings, with a few notable exceptions, and feel like I'm looking 5 to 15 years back in time from what the practices are from businesses. And so it's actually not that hard to predict the future, because in many cases it's already being experimented with, people have learned, people have failed, and now we know what actually works in terms of using information. And so I think this is going to have a huge impact. I think the future is amazing, and I'm going to try and actually outline some of the key elements. It was that time machine element that caused me to write the SSIR article, using data for action and for impact. And it actually came from many conversations that I have with social enterprise CEOs. And they're caught in the middle, right? They have their frontline staff, often millennials, are coming to them and demanding better tools. Collecting data on paper? Are you kidding me? Is kind of the reaction that I hear. And they're also under this pressure from their sources of capital, whether those are foundations or investors, who are demanding evidence of impact. And so part of my article was pointing out that, the social enterprise CEOs aren't often investing in this kind of capability. And also the capital side, the donors and the investors often aren't willing to invest in it either. And yet everybody thinks that they want it. And so my goal was to see, from a position of sort of constructive engagement, how we can actually move the needle on this. And so the thesis in my article is essentially, if we can make the technology sing and dance for the member of the community that we're serving, that could be our customer, it could be our beneficiary, it could be our user or member, whatever you want to call it, the frontline staffer of the enterprise, and the people who actually run the enterprises, that actually manage those programs. If we can make it sing and dance for them, that actually makes their lives better, makes them more effective, we're going to be throwing off a data trail that is actually going to connect to these larger impact things. The proxies for impact, the RCT that you actually know someone has proven it works, you can actually say, all right, we're now more effective at dealing that. And when I talk to people about big data, I have to kind of grin because I say, well, you can't talk to me about big data until you actually start collecting some data. And by data, I don't mean doing a survey once a year or at the end of a 3-year contract on how you did. Data should be something that you're using day to day, week to week, month to month, to actually, first of all, manage the enterprise better, get those insights. And when people start actually using data to manage their enterprise better, then they start asking new questions. They start demanding more. They start becoming more data savvy, and the value starts building until we actually get enough data that we can actually make some of these large-scale big data things. Because if you throw off enough of a data trail, now I've got something, or the data scientist, the analyst, has something that they can actually connect that into. So, if collecting this data is actually going to change your work, and that's key, right? We don't collect data for its own sake unless we're doing compliance. But if you actually collect data so that it actually changes your work, that you'll make a decision differently with that insight, you're actually going to begin to actually realize why this is a core part of your enterprise, not this afterthought, not this tack on, but central to that. And, dealing with Silicon Valley tech companies and startups, which is a lot of our funders, our volunteers, our advisors, no Silicon Valley tech company would get off the ground if they weren't busy, instrumenting the heck out of whatever enterprise it was, right? And understanding what it costs to deliver a unit of service, right? Understanding the economics of are we actually losing money on every customer? Or how are we going to get to a size where we're going to start making money on every customer? They are analyzing all the channels of acquiring different users, their customers, their members. And often in the social sector, we don't actually segment our customer bases and really understand, gosh, we do awesome things for these 40% of our users, and we waste the time of 40% more. If you don't ask those questions, if you aren't digging in, you won't get those insights. And yet, it's essential delivering more impact because we actually should be focusing on the people who have the most benefit from our product, from our service, from our charitable delivery, whatever it might be. So with that sort of data strategy in mind, I'm excited about the rest of this session. I mean, tomorrow we're in, I think, session number 3, where we actually get into a lot of the details of how you might operationalize this. And so I'll talk about both the social enterprises that we have, that have data warehouses, that have dashboards that people are using daily, and about social enterprises that are engaged in the developing world, both around charitable activities, but also social enterprise, purpose-built businesses, and how they're actually collecting this data to inform how they actually do better with their workforce or with their beneficiaries. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's really exciting.
We'll pick up on a few of these themes because I think I know people on the panel will have reactions to them. So
yeah,
let's go over to, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Let's go over to Sasha. So Sasha is the Chief Innovation Officer at Acumen, and you've recently done quite a bit of work organizationally as well as you personally around this concept of lean data. But Acumen's been a pioneer in this space around really trying to understand how to unpack the value of data, how to now more recently collect it more efficiently, and then how to make decisions, building on some of the themes Jim picked up. So tell us a little bit about, again, this whole big question of where are we going, how do we get there, and pull out some of the threads maybe that Jim was referring to.
Great. Thank you. Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you, Krim, and it's a great panel to be a part of. I'm going to really build on a lot of things that Jim said, although we didn't plan it that way. So the question is, where are we going? And I have to admit that as I was thinking about this more, I'm kind of two minds, kind of slightly pessimistic and slightly optimistic at the same time, or optimistic and pessimistic about different parts. And the reason is because I think we took a wrong turn a number of years ago. And at least so at Acumen, we've been investing for about 15 years in social enterprises that are fighting poverty. And the thesis around impact investing had been that we're going to re-engineer businesses so they can make change in the world, and we're going to bring together things that don't normally go together because we think we can do more. And so where we failed to notice something that had been separated was that customer value and impact were somehow going to be in these two different worlds. And entrepreneurs were going to worry about customer value, and then kind of pointy-headed data geeks, myself included, would worry about impact. And so if we don't get over, my so the next fork in the road for me is if we can find a way to put those two things together, impact and customer value, then I'm very optimistic. And if we can't, I think we'll continue on our current path. Just to give you a little bit of context around what we've been doing at Acumen with lean data. So our observation is that even in the world in which Acumen customers live and operate, which are usually very poor and often rural customers, nearly every single person has a cell phone, and if they don't have one now, they will in the next 3 or 4 years. And so 2 years ago, we started saying, what would happen if we bypassed every other step and went straight to customers and started asking them questions? We, just this year in our lean data work, have done 24 lean data projects in 11 countries. We have surveyed more than 20,000 customers. Our typical project takes a matter of weeks. And I have case after case after case of companies saying, great, now we want to do this ourselves. Right? So if we can do value creation between companies and customers, that's where I think we will unlock. In terms of where I think the future is, to Jim's point, we know what the future looks like. So I'm very confident that companies will get more data from their customers, no matter who they are and where they are. So I think there will be huge movement at the company customer level. Whether that then translates up into a sector level, I think we'll have to see bigger things change. And just to give you an example of a story, I want to tell you a story about an organization called New Story. So New Story is not an Acumen investee. The founders, one of the founders who got in touch with us, a woman named Alexandra Lafsi. And she and her co-founders met each other in 2014. They got into Y Combinator in 2015. And what they're trying to do is raise funding to house people starting in Haiti and other places in the Caribbean. They had said to us that they essentially thought that impact measurement was going to be something for the future. Even though they're in Y Combinator, they had raised money. It was sort of like, look, we got to get this thing right first. And to Jim's point, when we have to, we will. We have taken everything we've done with our work in lean data. We've put it out online for free in a series of courses on Plus Acumen, which is a free resource for anybody. They took our course, and now they're doing it. And they very kindly are sharing with us what they've been doing, that we got videos and all this cool stuff. But the point simply is, there's a nonprofit who is early stage, is in the core of Silicon Valley, went to Y Combinator, but they didn't teach them how to measure impact. We as a sector haven't taught them how to measure impact, but the tools are there for them if they're going to take them. And I think more and more entrepreneurs will step up like they have and do it. And they will measure, and the reason they will do it is because they're going to understand that it's creating value for them and for their customers, allowing them to deliver on their mission. Again, where I think the bigger change needs to happen, and I'm sure you'll talk about this a little bit, is what needs to happen at a sectoral level so that people who are deploying money think differently about the enterprise because of the value it's creating. And I think the reality today, and I was literally just talking to a US-based social entrepreneur who's a very successful serial entrepreneur who has done mainstream business, is probably on his 6th business, but his business right now is more socially oriented. And he said, when impact investors come and talk to me, by and large, they have no idea what they mean by impact. They have no clarity on what their goals are. And as a result, they don't value the impact that I'm creating in any substantive way. And so if the moment in which the person deciding to deploy capital doesn't have goals of their own with respect to impact and cannot recognize it, then the side of the ledger that we're trying to build, which is social value creation is valued, risk is worth taking around it, and we're going to deploy capital against that, which all else being equal is the fundamental thesis of what we're doing here, then we'll never really get there. And so, my belief is if we can focus on the how we go about doing it, the entrepreneurs are going to step up. And I think our challenge as people deploying capital and sort of shaping the sector is, then what are we going to do? And will we, and we're sitting in the deploying capital, will we show up to them and go, oh, great, you're doing that, I value it? And, we have to see.
Yeah, no, those are some fascinating themes, and I know we're going to pick up on some of that today, but also over the next couple of days, because both of you are slated to talk about the investor perspective, the enterprise perspective, and again, what it actually means as we roll all this up, at a field level. So thanks, Sasha. I know, Kelly, you're going to pick up on a few of these themes, particularly this whole issue of what is the business value of impact measurement, and in terms of not only the data and the processes, but also what does it mean as a field, the collective work that we've all been doing over the last few years. I think it'll be interesting to hear from your perspective, not only from the GIN, but also you've been part of many of the conversations at the global level through the G8 Impact Measurement Working Group, et cetera. So I'll introduce you first. You're the Senior Manager for Iris and Impact Measurement and Management at the Global Impact Investment Network. You're going to talk to us a little bit about how the GIN has been trying to evolve field building in this area, but also more recently has stepped up what that looks like. So I'll hand it over to you to answer those questions, but also maybe pick up on what Jim and Sasha have talked about.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep. So again, my name is Kelly McCarthy, and just for a little bit of background, as a different perspective, the GIN's real purpose is to increase the scale and effectiveness of impact investing. So while we don't directly invest, we work alongside investors and other field builders and standard setters to identify barriers and challenges to growing the industry. And my job there, again, just to put my comments into context, is to really use our industry vantage point to find ways to actually improve the efficacy of impact measurement as a means to forwarding the progress of impact investing. In one such way, and thank you for mentioning IRIS, is we manage IRIS, which is the catalog of social and environmental performance metrics, which I think the majority of impact investors are using today. So to the question of where we're headed, I am very tempted to violently agree on the points about the data imperative, but that would absolutely be no fun. So I'm going to go in a totally different direction. And I'm going to talk about the mindset imperative. So if we, and I'm going to zoom out. If we truly want to call this impact investing, then it's imperative that we start talking about taking impact as seriously as we take financial considerations and results. That we're starting to develop tools that actually can help us do this effectively. I had a conversation this morning with a gentleman who sits on the client-facing side of a wealth advisory firm, and we talked about a bunch of things, but I was struck by one point in this conversation. We started talking about asset allocation, and he was going into detail about the financial considerations for an asset allocation strategy, and then I was pressing him a little bit about impact. And he was like, yeah, kind of just like brushing it along. And it struck me that we're still at this point where we're relying so much on instinct and belief rather than relying on evidence. And I was trying to think about why is that, and I came up with 5 reasons. I think the first is we've been muddled with sorting out the connection between goals and the real indicators that actually tell us if we're making progress towards those goals. It seems like a simple thing, but it's been a real sticking point. I experience this every day in my work, talking to folks about IRIS. Compounding this, I think we simply haven't developed or done a good job of building a go-to evidence base of interventions that work, of investment strategies that work, of just things that a playbook, if you will, that we can point to that can increase the efficiency around our investment strategies. And building on that, I think we haven't developed the same and this I think gets a little bit, Jim, to what you were talking about. We haven't developed the same type of modeling capabilities for impact that we have for financials to help us take in terms of variables and forecasts with some degree of confidence how a particular strategy might play out from a risk of failure, from a results perspective, so that we can actually make informed choices. And I think we're also still thinking about impact measurement as measurement and accounting and reporting instead of thinking about it as managing towards optimizing or growing or improving the way that we actually deliver impact. We're not taking in, Karim, you were talking about context. We're not thinking about how to layer in context. We're just sort of thinking about it as sort of a rote process. And finally, this is something that's sort of near and dear to my heart. We have historically lacked a lot of coordination amongst the actors that could actually address these challenges. The standard setters, those that invest in field building, the evaluation community, and those whose job it is actually to analyze impact and make recommendations to decision makers. But the good news is I think the state of this and mindsets are shifting. I'll just quickly point to 2 sort of trends. The first shift is about the value of impact measurement, and I encourage everyone here. We just actually recently published a report called The Business Value of Impact Measurement because we were witnessing a real shift in terms of the conversation around impact measurement. It was actually starting to, and I'm very encouraged about this, focus on value creation. So we outline several case studies of investors, how they are creating value through impact measurement, and some investees as well. It's good. I won't go into detail about it right now. The second is, as an industry, I think I'm encouraged that we are starting to see the community starting to take impact seriously. And something kind of within this that's really interesting to me is the number of actually public commitments, high-profile institutional investors who are publicly committing to implementing a rigorous impact measurement practice. Now, we'll see how that plays out, but I mean, yesterday, I believe, TPG's Rise Fund, I read this in the New York Times, the last line was, and we commit to, creating a more rigorous impact measurement process. So that's encouraging as well. And again, the last is about coordination, and from where I sit, the appetite for coordination is improving. So what do we do? So a couple of things. We'll have to shift our energy from measurement and reporting to finding ways to actively manage towards greater social and environmental results. That's easier said than done. We'll have to find a common way of describing our impact goals, and I think, I was mentioning this shared playbook of sorts, I think, of credible, evidence-backed, successful approaches. And I think this stuff exists, it just doesn't exist in a place that's accessible. I think the conversation will need to shift to be about what we're learning about how certain business models and products actually affect people's lives and affect the environmental condition, and how we're talking about innovating and improving investment strategy, designing a portfolio to do this, and to help the businesses actually themselves. But of course, somebody's got to do the work. Somebody's got to do the research. Somebody's got to build the evidence base. Somebody's got to do this. So lastly, and I'm speaking to the funders in the room, I'm speaking to the standard setters in the room, I'm speaking to everybody here whose mandate is to actually build this infrastructure. We have to commit to coordinate and work more closely together to pool our relative strengths, identify those strengths and pool them, and seek to reduce redundancy in these efforts so that we can actually get this done. And the last thing I'll say just on the data point, is something I've been thinking about a lot. I'm very happy and I acknowledge that data has been such a central focus of a lot of these conversations and that the imperative is here to stay. But I want to say, artificial simplification of the process or of the data is not the answer. I don't want anyone to believe that we can or should be reducing impact down to a single number. These are people's lives that we're talking about. This is the environment. This is not the same as, as financial numbers. So I caution us to think that we should be running a few analyses and comparing a couple numbers and saying we've solved poverty and we've addressed, climate change.
Okay.
Yeah, I will pause there.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. That was really great. And again, some commonality, but also some things we need to pick up on and dive into shortly. So maybe I'll go over to Paul and make some opening remarks. So Paul is the president of Grassroots Capital. You bring a wealth of experience from deploying different forms of capital in emerging markets, but also have seen this play out in the microfinance sector in particular in terms of how do we address this issue of impact measurement versus performance management? And again, the choices that we make at a field level, but also very practically when you're managing capital. So maybe talk a little bit about the big question around where we're going and how to get there, but also very practically, what are some things that you've seen work or not?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Karim. And I was hoping, as the last speaker, that I would have an easy job and I could just contradict everything that everybody else had said, but they've made it a little more difficult for me. But I do want to sort of pick up from the perspective. We've been investing in what would now be called impact businesses for about 15 years, and so to some extent, when we step back and we sort of look at the challenges facing the sector, it's hard not to look at it in the context of where we were 15 years ago, which was basically that impact was a matter of faith and good intentions, and where we are now is so vastly different from that I tend to be optimistic in one respect and a little bit more critical in another. My optimism is really, I think well illustrated by just looking at this panel. On this panel we have people who are talking about, okay, how do we manage the data that we have? How do we disseminate the techniques for collecting data? How do we use data best? How do we collect it and use it most efficiently? And how do we communicate it to the different constituencies that can make use of this, either the people with operating responsibilities or the people who are making investments? There's other people, I don't know if they're here at this panel, but you have Tideline has been doing a lot of work in trying to figure out how to sort of package and put together the data in ways that will be accessible to primarily investors who don't have days and days to study all the intricacies of impact data, but to try to make it something accessible to try to facilitate the way that they think about this. And I can see people here from the Social Performance Task Force that have a whole working group on outcomes that is really collecting the outcome measurement systems that are currently being used by in the microfinance investment industry, which has I think about $9 or $10 billion under management. So this is being used now, and it's being used in investment decisions and in operating decisions. So I think I am not among those who subscribes to the view that there's not enough data, or there's not enough evidence, or there's causality needs to be demonstrated. I mean, there's work going on in all these areas, and I think there's more clarity in terms of who's really responsible for what. There are groups out there now that are doing RCTs or doing other analyses, longitudinal studies of what's working and what's not working. That's not really the responsibility of the individual businesses, but that is accessible through academic sources and through various research outfits like JPAL and others. There are standardized metrics that have been developed and are in fairly wide use, like the GEARS, like the Progress Out of Poverty Index. So I think we have to sort of, and picking up on the idea that this is a mindset change, I think we have to sort of change our mindset in the sense that it's no longer a question of the data's not there, the proof isn't there, the standards aren't there. I mean, of course they can be improved. And a few weeks ago, there's been this whole series, I think in The Economist, about various major sort of theoretical paradigms. And there was one, I read one of them, it was about fiscal policy. Okay, well, so we've been arguing about whether fiscal policy is effective for the last 80 years. That doesn't prevent us from actually implementing, using fiscal policy, trying to improve it. And I think we're sort of at that point in terms of impact measurement and impact assessment. There's lots more that can be done, but I think the raw data, the tools are good enough that nobody should be saying, we're not going to get into this because we have to wait until it gets better. I think that a very important part, which a few people have touched on, is investors, promoters, entrepreneurs have to be very clear, and much clearer than I think we've tended to be in the sort of romantic past of good intentions, about what it is they're trying to achieve and the theory of change, how they want to achieve it. But once that's done, I think there's more than enough information to implement that and to improve it and to use it to improve operations and to refine it and take into account, new research as it becomes available. So to me, in terms of where we're headed, I think it's very clear, the things that Jim is saying and the kind of techniques that Acumen has developed, this is clearly where we're headed, to use data efficiently and effectively to address the needs of both operators and investors. To me, I think the biggest obstacle to actually getting there is this confusion that has emerged about whether impact is sort of a subsidiary feature of financial investment, or whether it's something that is the whole point of the enterprise in the first place. Impact investment, or what it was before it was called impact investment, didn't emerge as a way of enhancing financial performance. It emerged as a way of trying to address social challenges that could not be as effectively addressed through philanthropic or government initiatives. And so it was an attempt to bring a different set of tools to bear. And so I think if we sort of start from that, from that point, and start, with a clear theory of change, with a clear sense of, okay, what are the best tools and data available to assess whether we can effectively address that social change with this tool or not, I think we can make clearer progress. But if we keep talking about impact investing or impact metrics as a way of reducing financial risk or enhancing financial returns, I think it sort of diverts us from the focus that we need on refining and improving the demonstration of the impact that the operator or the investor is trying to achieve in the first place.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Some very, I think some interesting comments and maybe some provocative ones that you guys want to react to. I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to ask you guys to ask questions of yourselves, because I know there's some follow-up. But as all of you have touched on this move from impact measurement, as we maybe have traditionally have known it, more of an assessment kind of feature, what has actually happened, to using the data to be able to make better decisions. Whether it's for investors, investees, intermediaries, et cetera. What are the implications of that over the next decade? Right, as we have this mindset shift, as we use technology in more efficient ways to be able to collect data, but also use data. And the two specific questions I want you to, or two specific areas would be, what implication does it have in terms of the who pays for this data, or who pays for all of the efforts, and kind of how do we have to shift our mindset around that from the one we have today? But also, what does it mean for the kind of robustness of the data itself? What's good enough impact data? And I know each of you has a view on that, but as we just look forward in that shift to performance management, let's say as a way of thinking, what's it going to take to get there from a cost perspective and from the kind of mindset shift across the ecosystem? Anybody want to jump in? Sasha?
Just for kicks, I'll say that the who pays question is phrased in such a way that it seems like a drag on the enterprise. So, I don't actually know who pays. My guess is, in general, at least in the parts of the market where we operate, people are using equity for like everything under the sun and for way too many things like R&D. My guess is it's some combination of either the fund with a part of its fee, because by being an impact fund, your LPs allow you to say, look, 25 basis points of this will go to this, or the enterprise. My guess is some combination of those two things. But again, I worry that it sounds like a tax. So I just want to name that.
And in terms of the appropriate depth of let's say, measurement?
The appropriate depth of measurement is the appropriate depth that will allow operating management team to make better decisions.
Right. Okay.
I think I think the question is, betrays sort of I'm not picking on you. Yeah. Betrays a peculiar way of looking at it, because I think that the idea that impact measurement is something extraneous to an impact business is just a weird way of thinking about it. And I think, Jim, you sort of mentioned this in your article. I think I don't see how you can possibly conceive of yourself as being an impact business if you're not measuring your impact.
Right.
So it's kind of like,
totally,
if you want to go and you want to raise money in the market, you have to get financial statements. It may be a pain in the neck, but it's just, hopefully they're of some use to you in managing your business. But it's just part of being in business, and it's part of raising money from investors. Similarly, if you want to be an impact business, as you've said, if you want to be effective operationally, you have to collect this money. It's an intrinsic part of your business. It's not an add-on to
Agreed.
your core business.
But this is how we still talk about it today.
Kelly, do you want to go?
Jim
'Cause
and Kelly?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. I think there's a few things to unpack here. There's multiple levels of this who pays chain, and I think I think it's a little bit more nuanced than, like, the question of impact in this context is a little bit more nuanced than just impact measurement. I certainly think, I completely agree with you that if you call yourself an impact business, you should be able to back up your, how are you doing that? And if I were investing, I wouldn't trust, someone who doesn't have their financials in order, just as I wouldn't trust if they didn't have some sort of impact evidence to back it up. But as you sort of roll up the chain, I think, and I'm going to echo this conversation I actually had again this morning. The gentleman I was speaking to said, yeah, nobody has, the money to have, an impact analyst, full-time impact analyst staffed to count impact beans all day. And I was like, that is not the point. That's not. And so I agree with you on this as well, that it's the idea that if you are an impact investor, the idea that somehow this impact measurement function operates somewhere outside of your day-to-day management practice is, I challenge you to start to think about how you can actually start to weave that in, and I challenge you also to think about how your decisions are being made.
What could that look like? What could that look like? In terms of if that actually happened, what could that look like in practice?
Weaving it in?
Yeah.
In some of the more advanced funds, Acumen, you guys do this. It's from due diligence to exit. It's thinking about how do you sort of look for, theories of change that work and identify businesses that fit some of those models, some of those interventions. It's work. You have to figure out the research that's going to back it up. It's about, going through and effectively, whether from an equity perspective, let's say, sitting on the board and working with the company to say, this isn't working, that's not working, this is working, great, more of this, less of that. Let's continue to work together to optimize how you're delivering products and services to your customers, how your operational, how your operations are working, how you're treating your employees. And then at exit, I've heard, Paul, I loved this conversation that you were talking about at the SPTF conference several years ago about responsible exits. It's about, should you maintain the integrity of all the work you did with that company, to the point of exit or all the way through. That's what it's about. And so who pays? That's funny to me.
Well, and I take the view of the person who's operating the enterprise, because I'm either doing that myself, or my team is, or we're writing it for the people who do it. And we treat impact like it's all one thing, right? And I think much more is like the enterprise needs an information system that helps them make better decisions and run the business better on the assumption that whatever they're doing actually has impact, and remembering that whatever they're doing is likely to have something like IRIS or some of these different things, or the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. These are very gigantic things, and you're working on 10% of one SDG, maybe, if you can argue it. So you actually have to, and my argument in my article is that you have to, as a head of an enterprise, invest in this as a core cost of doing business in this century, right? You just have to do it, whereas you are not going to pay for an RCT. And if you're a for-profit, there's no way your investors are going to pay for an RCT, at least not very many of them will. And even in the nonprofit sector, the foundations, very few of them actually want to pay for the RCTs, but they would love to see that doing. So I tend to think of this as there's these very granular business, managing the business better and being better at whatever it is that you're doing, these medium-sized metrics, the kind of ones that you work with, and then these gigantic overall, sustainable development goal kind of metrics. And the kind of data and the impact measurements that you do are different at those different stages. And the last thing I'm going to mention is, we've gotten away from top-down design methodologies in business. We tend to prototype rapidly. We tend to be agile. We're not sure at the beginning of a 3-year engagement what the right metrics necessarily are. We're going to learn that as we build the business. And right now, the approach that we've taken to impact measurement doesn't always sync up with this more agile approach towards let's figure out from our customers and our business what it is that we're supposed to be tracking, and then work into why that actually has an impact, because that's probably why you're doing it.
Yeah, but I just... To spark the conversation a little bit, we're at the Social Capital Markets Conference, and I struggle to figure out whether we're on a path to create a social capital market, in which social capital and social value that's being created is driving and drawing capital. So like, if you're LEED certified, you have access to a set of capital that you otherwise wouldn't. If you have a certain gears rating, you don't, right? So we're many years in, it's not the case. And so I struggle a little bit to imagine what the flip is going to be if your allocator of capital doesn't care. And I hear you saying the business, if this is the business you're in, you must, which I agree with. But what will it take? Will it take a simplified number because people who care less than you do need to see that? Will it take a standard? Will it take a rule? But I think that we as a sector, like, while I agree that we should be coordinated and we should harmonize, there's going to be more and more money coming into this sector. More and more money is trying to. The people who are holding large amounts of money feel like there's not a lot of product out there. So this is all going to happen. But I think that so the definition impact will expand. It's going to actually pull us away. And so I think I wish I had the answer to this, I don't. But I think what we need is to start to think more broadly about what would need to happen so that capital really starts getting deployed in a different way. Because I agree there is data, but I'm not sure that we're on that path, and I think maybe part of the way is to look to other sectors in which non-financial data is leading to different decisions about capital deployment because different stakeholders and investors have different criteria. And are we doing that or not? And I would say as a sector, other than the development of financial institutions, which have ESG standards, and so you got to check those boxes.
Can I throw some kerosene on that fire?
Please.
Okay, so I counsel a lot of startup social entrepreneurs, and in the tech field, most of them are for-profit social entrepreneurs. And when I talk to them about their capital sources, I say, so, are you going to the impact investing crowd?
No.
The clear majority say, I would rather get money from a regular investor who's looking for financial return. I'm in it for my social impact, but it's actually a lower cost of capital, the amount of money is bigger, the transaction time is easier. And then I run to 20 or 30% who said, I couldn't possibly have done my venture without an impact investor.
Right.
So, but I'll tell you who the majority is. It's the people who just say, I want a regular investor. So,
Absolutely.
I don't know, how's that for? Yeah.
Kelly, you want to jump in?
I don't know. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm trying to pick which piece do we want to talk about. I mean, I think there's, we're talking about sort of a 10-year time horizon, right? And we're talking about like some of the sticky stuff, the potential dilution of impact. There's sort of like actors who would say we're very sort of purist and pure play, and then there's others who maybe are, may not apply the same sort of level of rigor to what they're calling an impact investment. But I think this is part of the natural evolution of, we're trying to sort some things out. So you mentioned some work that Tideline had done, and this year I've heard a lot about, can we get tighter on how we classify impact? I don't know if this is the answer, but I think in terms of sort of increments. We can't answer all of this together, but perhaps that's an incremental first step. Can we agree on a convention? The SDGs was raised as something. Can we agree on sort of, where are we trying to go with all of this? And if we can agree on that, then can we agree on how do we understand progress towards those goals? And can we agree on maybe how we structure deals to better, make it more effective towards?
Who's the we? I think that's the only question. Like, who's the we? Because we as practitioners can agree, but I just sort of feel like they're kind of bigger fish in the pond all of a sudden. And so they're looking to the early movers to say, how do I make sense of all this? Our answers are okay. But until somebody is deploying big chunks of money in different ways, and I'm not saying they're not, but I just don't know that there's a path. And I think who the we is matters increasingly.
And
Yeah, I think
will that we
is-
change? I mean, just to your point, over the next decade, because this is the other thing, right? There's a core group of folks that are developing standards, practices, tools. Will that change? We've heard a little bit already earlier about beneficiaries and how to get beneficiary perspectives embedded. You've talked about the managers and frontline staff. What does that look like in terms of, and does it have to change in order for us to actually answer these questions?
Well, I think in our experience, the sort of I don't want to be too negative and call it sort of an obstacle, but I think the sort of key point in the chain is the intermediaries, the financial advisors, the you know, the client relationship people. And I think that, you know, part of that, part of sort of bringing them along, and again, you know, bearing in mind that they have lots of things to do, they have limited time to become experts in impact investing. You know, I think part of that is to sort of acknowledge, you know, that we do have a lot of information. I think, you know, I think this holy grail that we're going to get one, you know, we're going to get a LEED certification for impact investing. You know, it's just, I just think it's inconceivable if you're talking about gender, you're talking about climate, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about health, you're talking about, you know, disabilities, you know, but I think what we can do is sort of say, okay, look, you know, if you have clients that are interested in gender, this is the best information on gender interventions that are effective. This is the data that the best organizations are collecting and incorporating into their operations in a day-to-day way. You know, this is what's available, and there's a lot available. It's not like we have to wait 5 years until we can get, you know, the Holy Grail, and you know, I think.
I think most of the people sitting in those seats find it overwhelming and confusing, and it's their job to communicate it to their clients. And
absolutely.
I don't know. I would challenge.
But they're not going to make the investment in even taking 10 minutes to devote to this sector if they keep hearing, oh, the data is not available, causality hasn't been demonstrated.
I totally agree with that. I guess I would just say, again, I'm no lead expert, so I'm sorry I brought it up, but I assume that if you go from a gold certification, you can work your way backwards to what it took to get there, right? And so for the person who just cares about check or no check, they can just look at gold, but presumably they're, you know, they're trusting the expert who said that led to that, that led to that. So I guess what I hear from the people, especially in the more public space, which is where we're not, you know, we don't operate in that space, is, can you all please get your act together? That's the problem. There's too much darn data. No one can agree on anything. And what I see is there are shops where individual people who have gone deep, they have deep expertise in doing this, but I do think it's kind of a rate limiting factor that you need the level of expertise required. So while I worry about the lossiness of simplification, I just sort of wonder if we're ultimately trying to like change the way capitalism works and stakeholders get a voice and all the, I mean, it's like a pretty big goal.
But if we keep saying where we're trying to get to is to be able to give you a single stamp of approval or a single number that you can invest if it's over 80 or not invest, you know, we're never going to get there. So if we keep telling them that, they're never going to devote the time.
And I guess what I would say is, as much as I feel the worry of that, if I look at Morningstar ratings and fund ratings and actually the simplicity coexists with complexity, right?
Yes.
People who are deploying capital in companies have a million numbers. And yet at the same time, for the person buying, you know, the whatever fund, it's Morningstar 4 stars.
But I don't think you're going to get any farther than gears in that regard.
And what we're talking about is that there is such a diverse ecosystem, and each one of the actors is using impact measurement in different ways in terms of their data to inform their decisions. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think what we're discussing right now is like, what are those segments, and how will that evolve again over the next few years? You know, for the average retail client today, they may need, in fact, that single number, whereas others may need a multitude of different kinds of things. Kelly, I know you wanted to jump in on this topic.
I just maybe want to say
okay.
3 things. A dollar is a dollar. An individual does not represent all individuals, and a place doesn't represent all places. I think, you know, to this conversation, I agree. You know, we are in this muddle, like the complexity before the simplicity. But I don't think simplicity looks like a number. I think simplicity, I think we just need to challenge ourselves. I mean, the technology space has been amazing at, you know, applying chaos theory and algorithmic, you know, blah, 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 to actually, you know, digging through massive amounts of data to help make sense of, you know, a variety of variables, you know, geographies, inputs, et cetera, to actually help folks make better decisions. Maybe that's where we're going with this. But I think, you know, drawing too many financial analogs is okay for now, but I don't know if that's.
And I think I would go further in this bottoms up area. If we make enterprises better able to run their businesses, right? They're going to have to go out and argue to the capital markets why here are our financial results and here why we're better for impact than other people. And yeah, you're going to be in the context of these larger things, but I think that people are going to be making comparables between enterprises that are in the same business line of business, just like people rate utilities different than they rate tech startups, right? And so, but I really want to see the ground up capability of dealing with data and saying, as a field, we think this is how we should be accountable for the impact of our sector. And right now, many of those organizations aren't very good at having that conversation. And in that vacuum, investors are saying, well, if you're not going to tell us, here's the USAID data directive. Bang, live with it.
And to build on that, right, the field is moving. There are a lot of folks in this space that are going to be working more on impact measurement. So what do the next generation of practitioners, leaders who are working on impact measurement need to know from you guys who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting? A lot of these folks will be doing that over the next decade. So what advice, guidance, direction would you provide around the next generation of folks that are working on this?
I can start.
Kelly.
3 audiences, maybe 4. Evaluators, social scientists, and analysts. I think there's this amazing body of work. The American Evaluation Association has been around for ages. Can we translate all of those learnings and apply it to the impact space? So how to translate tools and methods for the investment space. Social scientists, how to translate research and for the investment space. Analysts, we're going to talk about this, I think, the last session, but how to better interpret the massive amounts of data that we actually do have, and maybe get to more of a simpler way of understanding, are we doing something that matters?
Mm-hmm. Jim, Sasha, Paul?
Well, so I guess I see a lot of enterprises not being able to afford those people, frankly, right? And so, and if you look inside a tech enterprise, it's often the millennial who's on fire about marketing automation who may become your data person, even though they don't have the academic qualifications, because data scientists are very hard to afford, right? And so, so I want to actually raise the game in terms of the general manager or the program manager or the marketing person who's actually trying to actually measure the effectiveness. I think that's where we're going to get a lot of data savviness going on. Right. And over time, general managers are going to start acquiring it, just like they've been trained to be, finance for the non-financial exec. It's going to be, impact and measuring the actual customer satisfaction, these things, as just a key part of their job. They're going to become literate in that because of this more grassrootsy kind of thing, informed by the experts, but usually because they can't afford them, growing their own.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We time and time again are going to we have the capability in-house. We go to our investees, and they have thought about this, but just there's this speed bump between where they are and the doing of it. Mm-hmm. And when we help them do it, so for example, one of the things that we're doing is we've piloted a partnership in Kenya with an organization called M-Survey. Mm-hmm. And we have a core set of questions called Lean Data Core Insights. We've put those questions on the platform, and very soon, we're hoping to launch it in October, anybody could just show up there with 350 phone numbers, and within 24 hours, pay per number, it's inexpensive, get the data back. So we just want to make it as easy as possible to get over that first hump, because I would say about between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 of the companies we do it with just brings it in-house, because they discover that it's not actually that hard to start. Mm-hmm. And so I would just say, if you've convinced yourself that this is too hard and too expensive and that it might not create any value, try the first time. I think there's more and more tools out there. We're committed to sharing them. I know lots of other people are as well. Yeah. And then see. And honestly ask yourself, is this creating value? Is it helping me serve my customers better? And if you answer no, then don't go forward.
I've had so many conversations with social enterprise CEOs who've blown $100,000 on an app and it doesn't work. And so what we do is we created an app generator where we'll build you an app in an hour to collect data, and we'll host it, we'll build it for free, and we expect half the groups to come back to us a week later going, that was a stupid idea. And I'm going to go, yes, you figured out what wasn't going to work, and you didn't waste $100,000 on it. But if you come back and say, oh, if we just knew this one thing differently, now we're talking. Now we're actually going to use the data for something.
So we're down to our last minute, literally. So I'm going to ask you very quickly to answer this final question, and maybe we'll start with Paul. So just complete this sentence. In the next decade, impact measurement will.
Well, I think I'd like to think that it will adopt a sort of clear identity of its own and be recognized as providing a distinct value proposition to investors. which is not to say that it can't inform investment across the portfolio, but I'd like to see it have a very clear definition, and I think we can all contribute to that by insisting on that it's not sort of the stepchild of real investing, but it's actually something quite different and distinct.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Kelly.
Will be used as a strategic investment management tool that creates value.
Okay, very good.
Concise.
Will be how we know if we've succeeded.
Be a new normal.
Okay, those were awesome. Thank you very much. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please thank the panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks.